He heard them first. Thousands of voices, maybe millions. A roar of applause so immense it vibrated through every particle of what he had become, not in his ears, but somewhere deeper, somewhere behind his ribs. A sound made entirely of joy, and it was for him. He had spent 43 years bracing for judgment. He had been raised on the certainty that when this moment came, and it had come sooner than expected, he would stand alone before a tribunal of fire. He would be weighed, he would be measured, he would be found wanting. But there was no tribunal. There was no fire. There was only this, an ovation so vast that the whole of creation seemed to be on its feet for him, and he could not understand why. But to understand how a dying man on a Middle Eastern highway became the center of a celebration that stretched across the entire fabric of existence, we need to go back. Back to a region where faith was not a question, but a commandment. Where a boy learned early that the universe kept score, and every debt would be collected. They would call him the merchant, a man who had built his entire life on the architecture of obligation, who had spent decades polishing his good deeds like coins he hoped would be heavy enough to tip the scale. And then he died on that highway. What waited for him on the other side was not a scale. It was not a ledger. It was not a fire. It was a memory he had completely forgotten, and an entire universe rising to its feet for it. They called him the merchant, not because the title defined him, but because it was the only identity he had ever allowed himself to build. For over 20 years, he had run a modest trading business in a sun-bleached city somewhere in the eastern Mediterranean. Textiles, household goods, whatever could be loaded onto a truck and delivered before the heat became unbearable. He woke every morning at 4:30. He brewed his tea in the same dented kettle. He checked his ledgers before the sun crested the rooftops. And by the time the city stirred to life around him, he was already gone, behind the wheel of his delivery truck, navigating the cracked arterial roads that connected his warehouse to the surrounding towns. He was not wealthy, he was not poor. He occupied that narrow corridor of life where survival demanded constant motion but never quite rewarded it with rest. His hands were cracked from loading crates. His lower back ached from years behind the steering wheel. He measured his days not in hours, but in deliveries completed, invoices settled, margins kept thin enough to stay competitive but wide enough to feed his family. And that word, family, was the axis around which everything turned. He had a son, a boy of 9, quiet and watchful, who sat on the warehouse floor after school and drew pictures in the margins of old shipping manifests. The boy rarely spoke. He simply observed. He watched his father count money. He watched his father argue with suppliers on the phone. He watched his father rub the bridge of his nose when the numbers didn't balance. The merchant loved his son in the way that men of his generation and geography often loved, fiercely, silently, and from a distance that felt like duty rather than choice. He did not say the words aloud. He showed it through labor, every early morning, every long drive. Every negotiation stretched an extra 15 minutes for a few more coins. It was all for the boy's future, for a life less governed by cracked hands and sore backs. But the boy didn't see invoices and sacrifice. He saw absence. He saw a father who left before dawn and returned after dark. He saw a chair at the dinner table that was often empty. And in that silence between them, a silence neither knew how to break, a quiet grief was building. Not anger, not resentment, something softer, something like longing without language. The merchant's wife understood this rhythm. She had lived inside it for over a decade. She kept the plate warm. She kept the boy fed. She kept the household moving with a quiet efficiency that asked for nothing and received about the same. She did not complain. But some evenings, after the boy was asleep and the house settled into its familiar stillness, she would sit by the window and simply breathe. Not praying exactly, not waiting exactly, just existing in the gap between what her life was and what she once thought it might become. The merchant noticed these moments less than he should have. He was not cruel. He was not indifferent. He was simply consumed by the mathematics of survival, by the weight of obligation, by a theology that told him God kept a ledger of his own, because that was the architecture of the merchant's inner world. He believed, deeply, structurally, without question, that existence was a transaction. You obeyed. You sacrificed. You followed the rules. And at the end, your deeds were weighed on a cosmic scale. Good on one side, bad on the other. No exceptions. No mercy beyond what was earned. This belief governed everything. It governed how he worked, relentlessly, because idleness was sin. It governed how he prayed, precisely because deviation meant failure. It governed how he treated strangers, fairly but cautiously, because generosity without calculation was recklessness. And beneath all of it, beneath the discipline, the devotion, the exhausting architecture of righteousness, lived a fear he never spoke aloud. A fear that when the final accounting came, he would not be enough, that the scale would tip the wrong way, that all the early mornings and cracked hands and missed dinners would amount to nothing against some forgotten transgression he could no longer name. He carried this fear the way he carried everything else, quietly, invisibly, packed tight behind the sternum where no one could reach it, and on most days, it stayed contained. On most days, the routine held. The tea, the ledger, the road, the deliveries, the long drive home through the cooling dark. But there was one particular evening, a Tuesday, though the day itself hardly matters, when the merchant climbed into his truck for the return trip later than usual. The highway stretched ahead, empty and familiar. The sky was draining its last color into the horizon. He reached for the radio. He never turned it on. Something in the road ahead shifted. A shape, a shadow, a sudden geometry of light and metal that his mind could not process fast enough. And in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the ledger closed. The highway stretched ahead of him like a black ribbon pulled taut across the desert floor. It was late, the kind of late where the world empties out and the road belongs to no one. He had been driving for hours, his hands loose on the wheel, his mind somewhere else entirely, running through the arguments of the day, the weight of obligations he could never seem to shed, the quiet frustration that had become the background noise of his life. He didn't see the other vehicle, not at first. What he remembered later was a sequence of sensations, not thoughts, not decisions, just sensation after sensation, arriving too fast for his mind to process. First, light, a blinding wall of it, filling the windshield like a second sun had risen directly in front of him. His pupils contracted, his hands locked on the wheel. Every muscle in his forearms fired at once, a reflex older than language. Then, sound. A sound unlike anything he had heard before. Not a crash. Not yet. It was a roar. A compression of air, metal, and velocity collapsing into a single point. It was the sound of physics abandoning courtesy. And then impact. The steering column met his chest like a fist thrown by the earth itself. His ribs didn't break individually. They broke in chorus. A staccato line of fractures running from sternum to spine. Each one a sharp, white-hot punctuation mark seared into his nervous system. His body folded forward, then snapped backward. The seatbelt caught him for a fraction of a second, then failed. The windshield gave way, and he was moving, not driving, not steering, moving through space with no control, no direction, no agency. Glass surrounded him. Tiny fragments, thousands of them, suspended in the air around his body like a constellation that had lost its shape. For a moment, a fraction of a moment, everything was weightless, quiet, almost beautiful. Then the ground arrived. He landed on asphalt, face down. The impact drove the remaining air from his lungs in a single violent exhalation, and then there was nothing left to breathe with. His diaphragm spasmed. His mouth opened and closed against the road surface. He could taste grit, iron, the mineral tang of his own blood pooling beneath his cheek. His vision was wrong. The world had tilted, not slightly, completely. The horizon line had rotated 90 degrees, and the desert stretched vertically in front of him like a wall. He could see the crumpled remains of his vehicle perhaps 20 meters away, its headlights still burning, pointing at nothing, illuminating a column of dust that rose and swirled and went nowhere. He tried to move. His brain sent the command. His limbs did not respond. He became aware of his heart, not as an organ, as a sound. It was beating, but wrong. Too slow, too deliberate. Each contraction felt like it was being negotiated, like his body was arguing with itself about whether to continue. The pain was extraordinary, not sharp anymore. It had moved beyond sharpness into something vast and architectural. It had geography. It had weight. His chest was a continent of pressure. His spine was a fault line. His skull hummed with a frequency that made his teeth ache. But even the pain was beginning to change. It was thinning, becoming translucent. As if someone were slowly turning down a dial he hadn't known existed. A dial that controlled how much of his own body he could feel. His hearing went next. The hiss of the radiator faded. The crackling metal faded. The desert wind, which had been threading through the wreckage, faded to a whisper, then to nothing. What replaced it was not silence. It was the absence of the need for sound, a completeness that had no edges. His vision narrowed. The tilted desert, the glowing headlights, the column of dust. They retreated into a shrinking circle, like the world was being viewed through a tube that grew smaller with every heartbeat. He was cold. Then he was not cold. He was in pain. Then he was not in pain. He was lying on asphalt in the middle of the desert. Then he was not lying on anything at all. Something was pulling him, not physically, not like a hand or a rope, more like a current. A tide that moved in a direction he had no word for, not up, not forward, not inward. A direction that did not exist in any map his mind had ever drawn. His last conscious thought, the very last thought that belonged to the man lying broken on that road, was strange in its simplicity. He thought about weight, the weight of his body, how heavy it had always been, how much effort every single day required just to carry himself through the world. And now that weight was gone. He felt his heart attempt one final contraction. It was gentle, almost polite, like a guest excusing himself from a room. And then the road, the wreckage, the dust, the blood, the desert, the night, all of it, collapsed into a single point of darkness no larger than a grain of sand. And then that grain of sand dissolved, and he was elsewhere. The impact lasted less than 2 seconds, but somewhere inside those 2 seconds, time did something it was never supposed to do. It stretched, it folded, it opened a door that had no business being there. The steering column compressed into a shape that no longer resembled anything manufactured by human hands. Glass turned to powder, and in the fraction of a moment between the second and third rotations of the vehicle, something inside the weary exile simply left. He did not float. That is the word people use later, but it is not accurate. He was simply elsewhere. One moment the pain was everything. It filled his ribs, his jaw, his left arm where the bone had come through the skin. The pain was a country, and he lived in every province of it. And then the pain was gone. Not dulled, not masked by adrenaline. Gone, the way a radio signal vanishes when you cross through a mountain range. Total silence where agony had been. He was above himself. That was the first impossible thing. He could see his own body on the trauma gurney below, the torn shirt soaked through with something too dark to be sweat. He could see the paramedic pressing gauze against his neck. He could see the second paramedic cutting away his belt with shears that caught the fluorescent light. He noticed the ceiling tile directly above the gurney had a long crack running through it, shaped almost like a river on a map. He noticed the paramedic on the left had a small ink stain on the pocket of his uniform shirt. Details no dying man should have been cataloging. Details that arrived with a clarity sharper than anything he had experienced while alive. He felt no urgency. That was the second impossible thing. His body was failing. He could see it failing, could see the monitor numbers dropping. And yet he felt the way a man feels watching a storm pass over a valley he has already left behind. Concerned perhaps, curious even, but not afraid. The fear belonged to the body on the table. The fear was down there. Up here, wherever here was, there was only a vast and peculiar stillness. He tried to speak. No sound came. He tried to touch the wall beside him. His hand, if it was a hand, passed through the plaster the way light passes through glass. He was present in the room, but no longer part of it, a witness to his own unraveling. And then the room began to dissolve, not violently, not like destruction, more like ink dropped into water, the edges of reality softening, blurring, pulling apart into something formless. The fluorescent lights dimmed. The voices of the paramedics receded, as if they were walking backward down an impossibly long corridor. The ceiling tile with the river crack was the last thing to go. And then, there was nothing. Nothing is also the wrong word. There was darkness, yes, but it was not empty. It breathed. It had texture. It had presence. The way the ocean has presence, even when you cannot see it. You feel its weight in the air, taste its salt on your lips. He was inside something alive and ancient and patient beyond any patience he had ever known. He moved forward. Or rather, the darkness moved him. There was no walking, no effort, no friction beneath his feet. He was being carried the way a current carries a leaf down a river after the first autumn rain. Gently, inevitably, without asking permission. The golden point of light ahead grew. It did not brighten the way a lamp brightens. It opened, the way a flower opens at dawn, slowly, from the center outward, each new layer of radiance revealing another layer behind it, each warmer than the last. He was afraid. He wants people to know that. He was deeply, fundamentally afraid. Not of death. Death was already behind him, a fact as settled as yesterday's weather. He was afraid of what the light would show him, because somewhere in the deepest architecture of his being, he understood what was coming. Every mistake he had made, every lie, every cruelty, every prayer he had spoken without meaning the words. He had been raised in a tradition that spoke of judgment with absolute certainty, a tradition of scales and ledgers and divine accounting. And he believed, in that moment, that the light would weigh him and find him insufficient. His whole life, every year, every choice, every face he had loved or failed, was about to be spread open like a book on a table, and he would not be allowed to look away. The light reached him, or he reached the light. The distinction no longer mattered. It surrounded him completely, and it was not what he expected. It did not burn. It did not interrogate. It held him the way the earth holds a seed before the rain comes, firmly, without force, with an intention older than language. And inside that holding, something began. Not a voice, not a vision. Something closer to memory itself, peeling open from the inside. The light did not shine on him. It shone through him. Every cell, every memory, every breath he had ever drawn, illuminated at once like a house with every door flung open at the same time. He had no body here, and yet he had never felt more present, more real, more completely himself than in any waking moment of his 41 years on Earth. The shattered skeptic stood inside something he had no word for. It was not a room. It was not a sky. It was awareness itself, stretched outward in every direction like an ocean with no shore. And then the review began. He did not choose it. He did not consent to it. It simply started, the way dawn starts, without asking permission from the night. Scenes from his life unfolded around him, not like a film, not like a dream. He was inside each moment, experiencing it again with total sensory fidelity. The temperature of the air, the texture of fabric against skin, the exact pitch of a voice spoken 20 years ago. He saw himself as a teenager, slamming a door in his mother's face. But this time, he didn't just feel his own anger. He felt her heart break, the way her chest tightened, the way she pressed her palm flat against the closed door for 11 seconds before walking away. He saw himself as a young man, cutting a business deal that left a partner humiliated. and he felt the humiliation, not as an observer, but as the man who received it. Every ounce of shame, every sleepless night that followed. The shattered skeptic braced himself. He had grown up in a culture threaded with strict religious consequence, sin and punishment, transgression and fire. He understood the universe, or thought he did, as a ledger, and he knew which side of that ledger was heavier. So he waited for judgment. He waited for the weight of every selfish act, every lie, every moment of cruelty to crash down on him like a sentence read aloud in a courtroom with no defense attorney. He waited for the worst. But the light did something he did not expect. It skipped ahead. It passed over the arguments. It passed over the broken promises. It passed over every moment he had feared would define him. And it stopped on a Tuesday afternoon he had completely forgotten. He was 7 years old, maybe 8, walking along a dirt road outside his village, carrying a metal bucket of water that was far too heavy for his small frame. The handle bit into his palms. His arms ached. His sandals kicked up dust that stuck to his wet shins. The logical thing, the easy thing, would have been to dump the water, let it soak into the cracked earth, go home with empty hands and lighter shoulders. But the boy had noticed something on his walk out. A tree, small, alone, its leaves curled brown at the edges, begging for moisture in a landscape that had none to spare. Just a forgotten sapling on the side of a forgotten road, dying slowly in the heat while the world walked past. And the boy stopped walking. He set the bucket down. He lifted it with both hands, and with the careful attention of someone performing something sacred, though he had no idea he was, he poured every last drop of water onto the roots of that dying tree. No one saw him do it. No one told him to. No one would ever thank him for it. He simply saw something alive that was suffering, and he gave it the only thing he had to give. Then he picked up the empty bucket and walked home. He never thought about it again. Not once in 33 years. The memory had been buried beneath a lifetime of louder, heavier things, grief and ambition and fear, and the endless noise of becoming an adult. But the light remembered. And then it came. A sound unlike anything that had ever entered his consciousness. Not a voice, not music. A roar. A wall of celebration so vast and so layered that it seemed to contain every soul that had ever existed. Applause. Thundering, rolling, cascading applause, as if the entire universe had been watching that boy pour water on that tree and had been waiting 33 years for the chance to stand and cheer. He felt it not just in his ears, but in the core of whatever he was in that place. It vibrated through the architecture of his being. Tears he didn't have a body to cry somehow poured through him. He was shaking. He was undone. Not because of the scale, but because of the target. They were not celebrating a great achievement, not a sacrifice that made the history books, not a prayer recited in the right language at the right hour in the right direction. They were celebrating a boy with a bucket, a boy who chose, for no reason at all, to be kind to something that could never repay him. The light spoke then, not in words, in knowing. It communicated a truth so simple that it nearly destroyed him with its clarity, that every act of unconditional love, no matter how small, no matter how forgotten, no matter how invisible to the world, reverberates through the fabric of existence forever. That kindness given without expectation of return is the single most powerful force in creation. Not doctrine, not obedience, not ritual performed from fear, but the raw, unrehearsed impulse to ease the suffering of another living thing. That was the currency of the universe, not gold, not prayer, not penance. A bucket of water poured with tenderness onto roots that no one else remembered. He didn't want to leave. The applause was still ringing. The warmth was still wrapped around him like something he had been missing his entire life without knowing it. Every soul in that infinite congregation was still celebrating, still honoring the boy with the water bucket, still honoring him. And then he felt the pull. It started in his chest, a gravity that didn't belong to that place. A weight dragging him backward, away from the light, away from the presence that had shown him the only moment that ever truly mattered. He tried to resist. He reached out, not with hands, because hands no longer made sense, but with something deeper, with intention, with longing. It didn't matter. The light grew smaller. The presence, that voice without syllables, that love without conditions, grew quieter. Not because it was abandoning him. He understood that somehow. It wasn't leaving. He was being called back to something heavier, something denser, something that still needed him. The last thing he perceived before the world went dark was not a word. It was a feeling, a single, clear impression pressed into whatever remained of his awareness like a seal into wax. Remember the tree. 3 words. Or maybe not words at all. Maybe just a knowing, planted so deep inside him that no amount of forgetting could uproot it. And then the light was gone. Pain. That was the first thing. Not a concept. Not a memory. Pain. Immediate, blinding, and everywhere. It crashed into him like a second collision. His ribs screamed. His skull throbbed with a pressure that felt volcanic. Something wet ran down his forehead and pooled in his left eye, turning the world into a red blur. He tried to breathe and choked. There were sounds, but they came from the wrong direction, from outside. Sirens, metal scraping against pavement. A voice barking orders he couldn't decode. Another voice, closer, right above him, counting. Counting what? He didn't know. His body felt like a foreign country, hostile territory. Everything was too heavy, too sharp, too loud. Seconds earlier, or was it centuries, he had been weightless. He had been held by something that knew every molecule of his existence and loved each one equally. Now he was pinned to a stretcher, and the fluorescent light above him was not warm. It was clinical. It was indifferent. He opened his mouth. Not to scream, not to cry, to tell them, to tell anyone. His lips cracked and his throat burned like sandpaper dragged across raw stone, but the urgency was greater than the pain. He had seen something. He had been somewhere. He had learned the only thing that ever mattered, and it was dissolving by the second, like a dream you try to hold in open palms. A paramedic leaned over him, faceless behind the glare of the overhead light. Gloved fingers checked his pulse. A penlight swept across his eyes. "Sir, can you hear me? Stay with us." He grabbed the paramedic's wrist, weak, trembling, but deliberate. "The tree," he whispered. The paramedic paused, looked at his partner. The kind of look that medical professionals exchange when a patient says something that doesn't belong in any chart. "Sir, you've been in an accident. Try not to speak." "The tree," he said again. Louder this time, though louder meant barely audible. "I watered it when I was a boy. They all saw it. They were clapping." Silence. Not the sacred silence of the light. Not the silence that held entire universes in its stillness. This was the other kind, the human kind. The kind that means no one understands. The kind that means you are alone with something too large to carry. The paramedic gently pressed his hand back down, a small, professional gesture, not unkind, but final. "Possible head trauma," the paramedic said into a radio. "Patient is confused, disoriented speech." Confused, that was the word they chose. Disoriented. As if the clearest moment of his entire existence, the moment when every truth aligned and every question dissolved, was a symptom, a side effect, a neurological misfire to be noted on a clipboard and medicated away. He closed his eyes, not because he was tired, though his body was shutting down in sections like a building losing power floor by floor. He closed his eyes because behind them, fading but not yet gone, he could still see it. The boy, the bucket, the little tree in the dust. And somewhere impossibly far away, growing fainter with every heartbeat that pulled him deeper into his bruised and broken flesh, the sound of applause. He woke in a hospital bed 11 days after the accident. His pelvis was fractured in 3 places. His left arm was immobilized. His ribs ached with every shallow breath. But something else had changed, something the surgeons could not see on any scan. The fear was gone. Not just the fear of death, the fear of everything, the fear of judgment, the fear of inadequacy, the fear that every prayer he had ever spoken had been insufficient. That quiet terror that had lived behind his sternum for as long as he could remember, it had simply vanished. In its place was something warm, something impossibly steady. He described it later as the feeling of being held by hands too large to see. Within 6 months of his release, he quit his position at a logistics firm where he had worked for over a decade. His colleagues thought the accident had damaged more than his bones. His family was concerned. His wife, initially supportive, grew frightened by how completely he had reoriented his priorities. He no longer cared about the promotion he had chased for years. He no longer measured his days by output or earnings. He told her one evening that the only currency that mattered was invisible, and she did not understand. Their marriage did not survive the transformation, not because of anger, not because of betrayal, but because he had returned from the light as someone she had never met. The divorce was quiet, painful, and, in his own words, necessary. He moved back to the region where he had grown up. He began planting trees, not as a metaphor, not as a spiritual exercise, literally planting trees. He used what remained of his savings to purchase saplings. He carried water to them in the early mornings before the heat became unbearable. When people asked why, he did not preach. He did not lecture. He simply said it made him feel like he was doing the one thing he was always meant to do. He remembered the applause, that cosmic ovation, that roar of pure joy that had erupted across the infinite when the light showed him a forgotten boy watering a single dying tree. He wanted to live inside that frequency for the rest of his earthly life. Every sapling was a small act of love aimed at nothing in return. Every bucket of water was a repetition of that original prayer his childhood self had offered without knowing it was sacred. He also began visiting patients in hospitals, not as a counselor, not with any official title. He would simply sit with people who were afraid, people awaiting surgeries, people who had received terminal diagnoses. He sat beside them and said very little. When they asked if he believed in something beyond death, he would tell them about the tree, about the boy, about the water, about how the entire universe had erupted in celebration over something so small that no human eye would ever have recorded it. He told them that the thing they were most afraid of, the judgment, the reckoning, the tally of sins, was not what waited on the other side. What waited was a love so complete that it remembered every kind thing they had ever done, especially the ones they had forgotten, especially the ones no one had witnessed. The merchant came back changed, not because he had seen heaven, but because he had seen what heaven counted. He had spent 43 years building a life around what he believed mattered, and on the other side of that highway, none of it had been weighed. What was weighed, what made the universe rise to its feet, was a single afternoon when he was 7 years old, carrying water to a tree that no one else had bothered to see. So we ask you to sit with something. If you knew, truly knew, not as a hope but as a fact, that the smallest kindness you ever did, the one nobody saw, the one you've forgotten, is being held somewhere, counted, remembered, would you live differently? If a memory came to you while watching this, a small kindness you witnessed, or one you gave that nobody else remembers, share it in the comments below. Tell us what it was. Tell us who it was for. We read every single one. Nothing in this community is forgotten, including yours. And if this story moved something in you, if you know someone who needs to hear that what they've quietly done was seen, take a moment to like this video. It tells the algorithm to bring stories like this to others who need them. The same way one bucket of water can save a tree no one else noticed dying. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Every story we tell here is real, documented near-death experiences, told with the care they deserve. The next one is already waiting. Another life, another threshold. We want you to be there. Until then, be the light. Some lanterns are meant to be passed. This was the story of the merchant. The next one is already waiting.